Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of An Unexpected Podcast. My name is Tim, and with me as always, we have Matt, Mick, Rainier, and Devin. On this week's episode, we tried to make competitive lists with underused armies. The lists were not given any specific scenarios, and we have chosen 800 points, because in America at least, a lot of our tournaments tend to be 800 points. The only restriction was that they cannot ally their army with anybody that wasn't a green ally in the ally matrix. However, to start this episode off, I will be doing an 800-point list based on the previous two podcasts. Mick, Matt, Rainier, and Devin each did two 800-point lists. So I've chosen an 800-point list and made it without considering anybody else's lists to make it a little bit fair. So I'm completely throwing out knowing any of everybody else's lists, so that I was kind of going into the mindset of I'm going in with an 800-point list like I'm going to any random tournament, and I'm trying to make this work. So I ended up going with a pure Harad list. So my list is Suladan on horse, and in his list, or in his warband, he has 6 Harad warriors with bows, 4 serpent guard, and 2 Harad warriors with spear. My next warband is the Betrayer on horse. He again has 6 Harad warriors with bow, 4 serpent guard, 2 Harad warriors with spear. Next I have Raza, and he has 6 Harad warriors with bows, 3 serpent guard, 3 Harad warriors with spear. And last warband is the Golden King, and he has 6 Harad warriors with bows, 3 serpent guard, 3 Harad warriors with spear. So it's 10 might. I have 24 bows, 52 models.
You go ahead, Matt.
So where to start, Tim? I'm wondering if you would consider with this list removing the Golden King and his warband and removing Raza and his warband and replacing it with Azog. Because I think what this list needs is more signal tower, frankly.
In my head for a second, I was like, wait, how the heck would that work?
I was actually like, what kind of
you sold that so well. I genuinely was thinking that. I was like, wait a second. What's going on here?
No, I think this is a really good list. And I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to suggest a tweak and then a kind of larger adjustment that I think takes advantage of the inclusion of the Golden King. So this is a list that I use. I use versions of this list quite a bit. In fact, I've come up with an 800-point version kind of based on this list that may show up at a tournament. A couple thoughts here. First is don't sell the 24 bows short, even when you run into somebody with blinding light, because unless they have tremendous numbers of bows in their own army, and they may well not, because in order to get blinding light, they're having to put a good deal of points into things that aren't warriors in order to get that. 24 bows shooting into blinding light can actually, kind of outshoot many. I mean, especially if the Betrayer is willing to throw some will into that, can actually outshoot 8 bows shooting back, just because you have so many numbers. And with 24 shots, you're going to get some 6s, and those 6s may well get some wounds, especially if the other guy's army can't fit for either for scenario purposes or because his army is too large, can't all fit within the 6-inch bubble. Because remember, in Maelstrom of Battle scenarios, not everybody's going to start within that 6-inch bubble, more than likely. So that does a lot of damage. And as you point out, once these guys get into combat, we can fight for across the line a 6-inch banner from Suladan and rerolling wounds from Betrayer. They can do a surprisingly large amount of damage. One tweak I would suggest you consider would be to drop a handful of warriors, combination of warriors, serpent guard across the board. Doesn't really matter kind of where you take them from, and put 3 serpent riders into Suladan's warband. And he's got room for 3. And the reason you do that is just to give you that little bit of extra mobility. And those 3 guys, especially with Suladan's ability to march with them if he needs to do that, can give you some nice extra mobility when you need it, and in particular in certain scenarios. It's enough guys that you can kind of run them down one side of the board and get them off in a reconnoiter if you need to. It's enough guys so that you can run those 3 guys straight up the middle and seize the prize. Have 2 guys go, have Suladan call a march, have 2 guys run past the objectives to screen it off from the other side's troops, have your 3rd Serpent Rider run up, dismount, dig up the prize, and then have Suladan come up and end up in base contact with him so that the next turn, that guy hands the prize to Suladan and Suladan takes off. And that and the ability just to grab an objective really, I think, would probably take this list from kind of a low mobility list, I would say probably on the 2-ish side, because really it's just kind of walking around, and you tend not to want to spend Suladan's might on march, up into like the 3.5 range, where combined with the numbers, it's going to be good enough. The larger adjustment, which is something you could consider, is a way to kind of synergize with the Golden King's special rule. And this would be to delete Raza's warband, and you probably would have to delete a couple of other figures from somewhere else to make up the points. Turn the betrayer from a Harad betrayer to a Mordor betrayer. Throw in some Morannons into his warband. So you still, if you flesh out the Golden King and Suladan's warband to full, you still are going to get 15 or 16 bows. Well, 15 bows there, 15 poison bows. You still have the betrayer's bonus. You have some Morannons that can kind of sit in front of those guys and be the defense 6 wall in front of their spears. And then what you do is you add in a Mordor war catapult that comes with the free troll, and give him the severed head rule. And what that allows you to do is get when you get the betrayer and the Golden King within 12 inches of your enemy's heroes, and you start slinging severed heads on top of them. They start taking courage tests at a -1 because of the betrayer. And if they fail that courage test, they run off the board. And that's where the Golden King goes and spends, he can dump up to 6 will into that to make you can make the enemy's main leader run off the board if he has a not so decent die roll on his courage test. And you can make heroes run away with that. And that's a really potent combination. You're not going to end up with 52 models. You're probably going to end up with somewhere in the area of like 35 models. But if you really want to get the most out of the Golden King special rule, that's the way to do it. Because it changes his special rule from something that makes people run away more often when they're broken to, oh my God, my leader could run away if he takes a hit from this catapult. And it can be a blast radius hit, even if you divert it onto somebody else. If he's still in range of the severed heads, he has to take it. And the other thing that allows you to do is it allows the betrayer, who isn't great at casting spells. I think he's one of the was he?
He's like a combat caster, yeah.
Yeah, so he's not the greatest, but he's not.
But he can start then slinging like 1 will drain courage on the other guy's potent heroes, which he gets off on a 3+. And the other guy really needs to start thinking about whether or not he's going to resist that drain courage. If 1 or 2 drain courages go on top of the -1 he's going to get from being near the betrayer, and all of a sudden starts to be really likely that his general's going to run away if a severed head falls on top of him and he freaks out. So that means that the enemy generals who are getting targeted by this drain courage have to start resisting it. And that drains their will to the point where the betrayer can actually start to transfix them when you need to. So those are my 2 thoughts. Minor adjustment, add in some serpent riders to get your mobility. Major adjustment, add in the catapult.
All right, so what would you give it out of 5, Matt?
So I would give this version of the list probably a solid 3.5, potentially a 4. You know what? I think I'd lean toward a 4. I think this has got enough numbers to be really dangerous to a lot of lists.
Well, and that was the other thing that I thought about when I was thinking about everything in this army, if it's in range of the Betrayer, besides the Golden King, who has 4 attacks and strength 4 and +1 to wound, everything in the army re-rolls to wound if it's in range of the Betrayer. So even like Suladan, like I said, there's a lot of killing potential, and there's about 9 inches of banner range. I'm going to move on to Rainier next. Rainier, what do you think?
Yeah, Matt got a lot of the basics. My main thing whenever I take a Harad army is always thrown at least, as he said, 2 or 3 Serpent Riders. And I take Serpent Riders over regular Haradrim Raiders because of the fight for just 1 more point. Another thing, I wouldn't critique your heroes. I just want to tweak the list build a little bit. You have 50-50 ratio with bows, which is awesome. You're abusing that bonus as much as you can. But you also did 50-50 spear to non-spear ratio. And I would change that. I don't think you need 50% of your army to have spears, especially considering you have a semi-horde, you're going to be flanking a lot. So I'd probably drop, whether it be a few Serpent Guard or drop a couple spears, and I'd throw in some Abrakan Guards just to get more killing power. Because you talked a lot about, and I agree with you, your heroes can do a lot of damage. But outside of that, your army itself looks very looks very cookie cutter, like out of the box from Games Workshop. And I think to a competitive opponent, it's not gonna affect them as much. But if you sprinkle in some Abrakan Guard and, like Matt said, some Cav to kind of balance the killing power throughout your army, not only your heroes. So that would be my minor change. Throw in a little more killing power with the Guard and the Cav, and split your 50-50 ratio with spears and non-spears to save yourself on points. And a big change to the list would probably be your hero choice. I know from talking to you that you love the Golden King, and he's an underused character. I know it, but I'd probably change him as well, kind of like Matt said. I'd change him in a different way to stay pure Harad. I would switch the Golden King to a mounted Haradrim Chieftain, or Haradrim King, excuse me. A mounted Haradrim King is going to be fight 5, a higher fight value than the Golden King. And you can get him, you can mount him and give him a War Spear as well, and he becomes a mini baby Soladan. So instead of having Soladan running amok being your general, you got to protect him from those victory points from your opponent. You can have your chieftain do that as well. The chieftain also has heroic march, so you could save Soladan's might for heroic striking and heroic resolve. So those would be my big ones. And then if you did downgrade the Golden King to a Haradrim King mounted with a War Spear, you'd have more points to upgrade guys to Serpent Guards and even bolster Soladan's Warband a little more. So that's about all that I changed. But good list. I'd rate it 3.5 to potential 4. The main thing I do like about the list is new players can use this list build pretty easily, and it is extremely competitive if you use all the things together. But yeah, good job, Tim. I'd say it's a 4, 3.5 to 4.
Okay. I'm gonna move to Mick. What were your thoughts?
So I agree completely with both Matt and Rainier on Serpent Guards. I would probably take 2 or 3. Then I actually quite like to keep this list quite pure, and I do like the Golden King as well. But what I seem to be missing in this list is sort of more killing power. So I've always been a fan of Betrayer on Felbies, because effectively, as soon as you get into combat with someone and you win fight, you're essentially like a flying Spider Queen. And Suladan's banner also improves Felby significantly by giving you the reroll as well. So something like a charging Betrayer on Felbies actually rolls 4 dice to win, and then 6 dice to kill with rerolls with strength 6. So he's actually really good in combat that way. So what I would change, I would potentially swap Raza and 15 points for a Haradrim Chieftain on food, because that gives you another march as well. And Raza is only fight 4 for most of the game, unless he goes into combat with a specific hero of your opponents. So you're significantly increasing your mobility by having marches from a Haradrim Chieftain instead of having to burn might from Suladan, who can then use his might for combat. You then have more killing power from the Fell Beast. You can still use your special rule to affect your warriors. In fact, with a Fell Beast, you might even be able to get a slightly larger range for your rerolls. And then my other change would also be adding some Abrakan Guard, because at the moment, even though you do reroll a lot of dice throughout your army, there's nothing really as good in Harad as Strength 4 with Burly, because at that point, killing Defense 6 on 4s or Defense 7 on 5s is arguably better than just having a Strength 3 with a reroll. So I would perhaps drop, let's say, 4 or 5 models and swap some of your frontliners for Abrakan Guard. And yeah, the Raza for Chieftain and Gervalis. Other than that, I think it's all good. I mean, 20 to 24 bows, it doesn't really matter whether you're on 20, 22, 24. You're still out shooting everybody who doesn't have Blinding Light. And even through Blinding Light, you're still able to do a lot of damage. Yeah, I suppose only other change I might potentially make is to actually swap Betrayer for something like a Shadow Lord on Fell Beast from Order List, but I wouldn't necessarily go that way. It would only be if I'm really expecting to be facing a lot of bowfire from my opponents. But most of the time, I think I would just take the Betrayer. So I'd say generally I would probably rate your lists as sort of like a 3.5, but quite solid, because you have large numbers, you have a lot of everything, but it just doesn't seem to be too exciting generally. Yeah, so it just seems to be missing a few nice toys, or like just additional dice here or there, additional Strength 4, additional Barely. But yeah, I like it generally.
So basically, I just want to go back to Mick for 1 second. The reason I didn't put the Betrayer on the Fell Beast, and I always struggle with this, is the one thing I always think about over and over and over again. So I take into account at 800 points, not guaranteed, of course, but there's a good chance you'll probably come up against one wizard. And if you're on a Fell Beast, they're probably going to try to stop that, especially with Betrayer rerolling to wound. So you're probably going to have to use at least one will a turn to resist a spell from the opposing caster. But let's take that out of the occasion. Even if you didn't have a caster to come up against, you then have to spend a point of will to get into combat, and then you have to spend a point of will to activate your ability, and then you'd have to spend a point of will if you ever wanted to cast magic. So per turn, you're essentially using 3 to 4 will, and that's kind of where I didn't want. If you're up against another caster, there's a chance you're spending 4 will a turn, so you're only getting at most 4 turns out of the Betrayer. If you were to go into combat every turn, activate your ability, if you wanted to cast a spell, and then if you wanted to resist with one, each of these being one will, he's very limited on the amount of time you can do it. So I always hesitate wanting to put him on the Fell Beast.
I would counter-argue that. I would say that, first of all, you don't actually have to go into combat ever. You can just sit back, and then if a great opportunity arises, you can jump in. But effectively, by just hovering around, you are denying your opponent the freedom to just accidentally leave someone back, or just you're going to be able to exploit more of your opponent's mistakes just by having this threat and just by having him think about it. So in that sense, you're not really spending that much will on going to combat. And then once you do go into combat, it's a time when you won't really need to be activating a special rule anymore. So that sort of takes uses up that will point. And the other thing was for things like wizards. Well, if they're casting something on the Betrayer, then they're not casting it on your Soladon or your Golden King or anything else. So again, it's just one of those things where you can keep yourself back or you can pose a threat. It just gives you more options, and the change really is quite tiny compared, because effectively Raza versus Harad Chieftain, it's effectively the same thing for most part when fighting against normal warriors. Raza has just an additional attack and her strike, but I feel like just the threat of having a Felbeast just jump in and start destroying is going to be a major advantage to you.
Okay, that was an interesting thing. So it's kind of like you keep him back for the most part, as like you make your opponent think, well, maybe he is going to go in. So it's not necessarily that he does go in, but more that it's a possibility he does. So you have to keep your opponent on guard, kind of a thing.
Well, there is that. Plus, there's going to be situations where a Felbeast lets you essentially move 24 inches within a single turn, because you just go, let's say, fly somewhere, charge something, heroic combat, and then go somewhere else. Almost like move your things from an objective to an objective by ignoring terrain, by flying over forests, hills, everything else. So it just adds that extra level of mobility from quite a big threat.
Okay, very good to hear that. Lastly, I'll move on to Devin. What were your thoughts?
All right. So obviously, a lot of my comments were taken up by the other three professional players here. So I got to agree with 2 points that I heard. One, obviously, the Serpent Guard. I actually do agree with, I would always recommend throwing some mobility in your list. Even if the objective is not to run across the board like Recon, having just a few cav in the list, if you just kind of, like, one trick I use is often to just throw them kind of out and then come back around a little bit later. They seem like they're doing nothing. And then against new players, they may chase them with a couple things. And I'm like, great, I actually defeated one player just by sending them off, and he sent like a large chunk of troops to go chase these random 3 cav. And I'm like, all right, fantastic. But if they don't chase them, you bring them back around, and then they're suddenly in places where the opponent wouldn't expect them to be on turn 4. So that's something that I like to do. But you could obviously use them in a more generic fashion just by simply throwing them in if you don't need them for any other purpose. But I would recommend cav. I mean, as far as the Rainier's point about the spears, I agree. You don't need 50-50. And I do agree with Mick's point in the fact that you know, Akraban Guard will do better in some cases than getting the re-rolls. So you can easily take away some of those spears for those Akraban Guard. Completely in agreement there. I think one thing I wanted to bring up that Matt and Rainier, I don't think Matt brought it up at the Fell Beast, but Mick, you know, covered that nicely. Absolutely, would I bring a Fell Beast? I think that, you know, having that flexibility and having and reducing your opponent's flexibility, just as Mick had mentioned, is awesome. Also, again, the point on the wizard, if they're casting the Fell Beast, then they're not casting a Suladon. Right now, your obvious target is Suladon and the Golden King, and Suladon's the better target because he's your general. So ultimately, you're looking at if there is another wizard on the field, which, as you mentioned, is likely, Suladon's not going to be doing a whole hell of a lot this game. So I think having the Betrayer as a false target to start, you know, attacking, which most new players will go after the big scary Fell Beast. So I think that's a great idea. And yeah, even if he's just sitting back, if you think about it, I mean, he's still accomplishing his job. And also, I think it was mentioned the fear of putting him in combat, you won't be able to activate your special ability. Maybe they catch him before he activates it. I think it triggers before heroic moves. So I don't think there's any way you can stop it.
So it is an active ability. So if you were to transfix, you can stop the re-rolling.
But the actual ability, I think, triggers before heroic combat, or heroic moves begin. I think. So Mick will check up on that. But that's something that I'm pretty sure it says, like, at the beginning of the move phase, you may elect to declare this action. Anything that happens at the beginning of the move phase, declaring heroic moves also happens at the beginning of the move phase. The actual resolving of heroic moves is not in the beginning. It's actually during that turn, the move phase itself.
Yeah,
and so,
that's correct, Devin.
Yeah, so you can't stop this ability. If you want it to trigger, it will. There is no stopping. Transfix it, you can't stop it. Well, okay, no, sorry. So transfix technically removes active abilities. Sorry, transfix does stop it.
Yeah.
So I apologize about that. Yeah. So, but you can't stop him by charging him, which I think that I think you
That is
still
correct.
if
In combat, he can use it, but if you're transfixed, you cannot.
Yeah. So I think excellent list overall. I think the fact that you lack the mobility in Cav, the fact that you lack multiple threats. I think Raza is garbage, personally. So. He's just such garbage. I mean, fight 4 hero that you got running around. What is he, like 90 points or something for that fight 4?
75. 75.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the main issue that I have with, what's his name, Elfhelm. But the difference is Elfhelm's spear is fantastic. So I'm like, all right, plus he's mobile, cavalry. This guy's just horrible on so many levels. I just don't like him. So, I mean, I would take him out easily, and I think that's a fell beast in the making. And then, as they mentioned, I actually, of the two ideas, the chieftain, I'm more on mixed side about keeping him on foot. I think that Rainier, within his own context, had a great idea about the Rajan King, but I'm just saying, if you were to do the fell beast route, then I would say probably a chieftain on foot. Golden King. So Golden King serves a lot of redundant effects that Celadon has. I think in your list, in just your list, I think your goal is basically to break your opponent as fast as possible, and the Golden King's just going around doing that. He's helping doing that. I think the Golden King is the type of model now that I would center a list around. So if I'm going to have the Golden King, then I would like to try to abuse his potential as much as possible. Maybe Spectres, I say, because they're an Angmar, so you really can't grab them easily. But, like the catapult idea that Matt said. So I almost feel like I should center my list kind of around his whole idea. Make sure obviously the list functions normally, but, centered kind of around that ability to be very useful. Otherwise, though, for a majority of the game, he's really just a 4 attack guy. And his banner would be useful, but Celadon is providing the same effect for a larger radius. So +1 to wound is fantastic. But yeah, so I'm not saying he's bad. I'm not at all. You can keep him in the list. He certainly does his role, but I can understand why the others may want to take him out.
So Tim, I'm going to briefly rise to your defense on one issue, and that's the Fell Beast. When I play this list and this variant of the list, I deliberately do not take the Betrayer on the Fell Beast. I think largely for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, first of all, you got to drop 50 points into the Fell Beast, and that's 5 or 6 models. And this is a list that, Napoleon once talked about the Russian army as saying that quantity has a quality all its own, and that's really the focus of this list. This is a list, as you say, that's trying to get the most out of that poison, and it doesn't necessarily have, big heavy hitting models or good models. It has adequate models, but it has a lot of them. And anything you kind of add into this list that drops the model count kind of takes the main focus of this army away from that. The other reason that I tend not to put the Betrayer on the Fell Beast is that I find that ends up getting my Betrayer into trouble. And that's for 2 reasons. First of all, if he gets compelled 6 inches and can fly over my models and get put into a position where somebody can take him down. Because, especially as he can't strike to begin with, and he can get compelled out into the middle of the opponent's army and killed if for some reason he doesn't make that resist check. The other thing is it creates this temptation in me to send him in. So I'm like, oh, I've got this big Fell Beast. I've dumped a bunch of points in it. I should use that. And then I go and I put him someplace, and then maybe I don't get the next heroic move off, and Boromir charges into him and he dies. Whereas if the Betrayer's on a horse, then he sits back behind this massive wall of bodies, and he just spends his will on a special ability and the occasional transfix. And you only throw him in when the other army is broken up, and it's really, you're kind of running over him at that point, and he can go in and fight like one ordinary guy at a time. And that, at least for me, avoids the temptation of kind of getting him overcommitted on the Fell Beast. So it's a perfectly rational design choice to put him on a horse.
All right, so just to finish this up, Devin, what did you decide on a rating for this?
For your list, I would say because of the lack of mobility and the obvious targets, I would say a 3.5, and the only reason I say above a 3 is mostly because your list actually hits surprisingly hard in close combat. I think that once you activate that poison, people will not, unless they fought the list before, they won't realize how fast you can shoot through an opposing army with that poison activated. So.
All right. So now we're going to move on to the main part of the episode. As a reminder, please leave your lists in the comment section below. We're going to try to review a list every episode. So just if you have a list that you're questioning whether or not it's good, or if you just have a list that you took to a tournament, you're like, well, is this actually a good list? Then we'll review it at the beginning of each episode. So please leave that in the comment section below. We're going to move on to the next topic, which is the main topic of the day. So everybody has chosen a underused army, and they've tried to make it work at 800 points. So to start off, I'm actually going to go over to Devin. So Devin, what did you decide to take as an army, and how did you decide to try to make it work?
I picked the Shire. Okay, now some of you may be shocked that I picked the Shire because that's a tournament-winning list in the past, and it's been doing extremely well. Well, in the latest edition, the Shire has been dropped pretty severely, in the fact that it had heroic march removed from a lot of its heroes, extremely essential for the army. It had a lot of its ally potential kind of removed, and they also got point increases and then bow reduction in range. So through all those different variations, they took a hit. So you haven't been seeing them as much, and I wanted to explore what makes them competitive. Now, if we're just sticking with green, there's one thing I got to say. In the Hobbit book, they can ally with Rivendell as a historical alliance. But in the Lord of the Rings book, they can't, right? Or it might be reverse. I'm not sure if they're allowed to historically ally with Rivendell. Are you guys aware of this? Mick, you have a book with you, but that's the problem in the two books. Now, this was clarified in an FAQ, and I think it said you follow the Lord of the Rings book. So I'm curious, Mick, what does it say as far as the alliance chart? Because that's something that off the top of my head. So while Mick is looking that up, the other alliance they have is Rangers of the North. And Rangers of the North gives them two fantastic options, which is Halbarad and Aragorn. So that's actually where I'm going to start my list as far as a green perspective. Since, are we all agreeing? I have to stay historical, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So just so you're aware, to the audience, I do think there's much better potential in yellow alliances for them. But let's go ahead into a green one.
Sorry, Dan.
So, yes.
Sorry, Rivendell is a yellow alliance in both books.
Oh, it's in both books. Okay, maybe it was a different one. So they're only green alliances with
Rangers.
Rangers of the North. That's it.
Rangers,
Okay.
Yeah.
So Rangers of the North is what I'm going to use. All right. So Rangers of the North, the obvious picks, in my opinion, are going to be Aragorn and Halbarad. And so this is a little rough because if you kit them out fully, it's 340 points. Now, I elected to do that, and I'll show why in a little bit. But I picked Aragorn and Halbarad, and I'll explain why I think they're essential. Then I'm just going to say the heroes. So I got Merry, Lotho, Sackville Baggins, Will Whitman, all right? And so there's a lot of new Hobbit heroes, so I'm going to explain a little bit of what they do in a minute. But I got Farmer Maggot and Wholefoot Sheriff Leader. So remember that my list was originally written as a yellow ally. So I originally picked Merry. I think I would let Merry go and instead pick Robin Smallborough. The reason why is actually because Merry costs 45 points, Robin costs 20, and I can get a horn for 20 points and then save 5 points and get an extra thing. Once you do that, functionally having Merry when you have Aragorn in the list really doesn't matter, because really the reason you're bringing Merry is either to upgrade to the Batland Brandy Bucks, which I'm not going to do, or to get Heroic March, which Aragorn already functionally provides. So, by the way, Aragorn and Halbarad are fully kitted. They have Andoril, the whole works, horses and everything. So, as far as the actual models, I have 65 hobbits in this list, and I'm counting Farmer Maggot's dogs as part of the hobbits. So 65 hobbits plus Aragorn and Halbarad makes a total of 67. I also, under Wholefoot, the sheriff leader, I have 12 sheriffs. So the reason I did that is because Wholefoot, for those of you who don't know, gives sheriffs +1 to wound. which adds to the hitting power in another area of the list. I also have Will Whitman, who provides a 6-inch banner when he expends a point of will. He can only do that 3 times. Now, the reason I did that originally was because my original list had 78 models. So my original list was going to be so vast, and I needed banners in multiple places. In this list, though, however, I have 67, so I'm a little bit more compact. But I still want the banner in 2 places should I need it. And I think Will Whitman is 30 points. Often the only other option will be Paladin 2, who's 25 points and does nothing. So 35 points extra to do something makes sense to me. So then I have Lotho Sackville Baggins. Lotho's interesting in the fact that he gives me the fight for it. I think that's essential because one huge problem with historical alliances is I can't get spears. Yes, I could get Dunedain at 25 points a pop, or 26 really, but that is a harsh price to pay for the spears that I need. Even if I dropped Hobberod to get that, I'd get like 3 of them. So it really just doesn't make any sense logistically. And this is the reason specifically that I say convenient allies work better. But I don't have that option. So essentially, no spears. But I need banners everywhere to make sure that I can at least win as many fights as possible. So that is the list. 67 models. There are, actually I have to recalculate the bows. I think it's 18 bows. Yeah, because Farmer Maggot actually has a plethora of bows in there. So it's 18 bows in there. Remember, they're all 18-inch range, not 24 like they used to be. And everyone's going to be armed with an axe, allowing me a potential strength 3 if I want that. And in the past, I have went ahead and upgraded to Battling Brandybucks. But like I said, I probably would have taken Mary out. Would I keep Mary in to do Battling Brandybucks? Not in this list, because my numbers are already struggling. At 800 points, you really want above 60 hobbits. And to make every hobbit I have cost an extra point, I'm now dropping 60 points, potentially. So essentially, or maybe like 40, but basically, yeah, it's just a lot of points to pay for that price tag. Now, here's the other quick caveat. One thing I would also change about my list. Now, keep in mind, my list has Mary in it, so we're establishing that. It has Mary because I thought I was doing a convenient alliance. But I would change this with Robin Smallborough. I might put in Bilbo Baggins. All right, Bilbo Baggins allows me to have a ring, and his only restriction is he can't be put in the list with Mary, Frodo, Pippin, and Sam. In my alternate version of this list, I don't have Mary, Frodo, Pippin, and Sam. So just letting you know, my list does have Mary, but given the time, I would actually change it to have Robin and Bilbo. So, list as is, though, it has Mary, and it has Halbarad and Aragorn. So I know that was a lot of explaining, but I had to get into it because they have a lot of rules. Oh, Lotho. Not only the fight 4, Lotho Sackville Baggins also acts as a doorstop. So on a 3+, he's able to stop a model from moving if they charge him. If you put Lotho conveniently in like areas where there's a funnel or a gap or where you don't want your opponent to go with a giant thing like maybe a Balrog, then you can actually bait him to try to charge Lotho. And maybe it's impossible to work it out any other way, and then you can stop him from moving. So it's just a little option in your tool bag otherwise. So going through the categories that we've talked about, and I'm going to hit these real quick. Might, it's kind of deceptive. I've got a lot of might, but I also have Aragorn, so I think I'm doing solid there. Heavy hitters. Halbarad is mounted, so he can be thrown in if necessary, but ultimately I'm kind of lacking in heavy hitters. I'll give that maybe a 3. I only have 1, so if you have a magic user, I'm pretty hurt. As far as tricks, you can say I got a variation of tricks. I mean, I guess throw stones and stuff. We'll say a 3, but I don't have any magic or anything really crazy. One thing I forgot to bring up, Farmer Maggot has 3 dogs. That's my cavalry contingent. The thing about the dogs is they're very, very tiny. Very, very tiny, so they can easily hide behind like everything in the game. So, but yeah, just so you're aware, if you're wondering why I brought Farmer Maggot, he also is a strength 4 model when you piercing strike with 2 attacks. So it just makes sense. And then when you calculate the dogs for 5 points apiece, he's really a 30-point model. He's just a no-brainer in my opinion. So anyway, grind ability, I've got 67 models. I think I can grind quite a bit, especially since my army's going to be shooting you to death, making you come to me. Shooting, obviously, I'd say a 5. We might say a 4.5 because my bows are short range. But Aragorn does have a bow, by the way. Because I know I'm making my enemy come to me, I do have Aragorn with a bow, which allows me to use his point of might to assassinate horses.
Or call heroic accuracies.
And call heroic accuracies, of course. Yep, all the whole thing. I mean, Aragorn is fantastic on the list. You run into a Balrog, great, heroic defense. I mean, he's got a lot of options that I need him for. So, and of course, most critically, heroic march. Anyone watching out there who wants to make a Shire list, you need a heroic march. You need a lot of it. In the Shire list, if you go pure, like the Legion, a lot of people might wonder why I didn't pick the Legion. It's because you can only get a maximum of 6 points of might on heroic march, and that might sound like enough. It can be. But you really need to make sure you move fast. You'd be shocked, like in a given game, it would take you an hour if your opponent almost didn't do much at all to move across the board. So as far as mobility, it's garbage. My mobility is trash. I think I brought it from a 1 to a 3 with Aragorn. So that's it. All right, so explaining aside, go ahead and rip it to shreds.
Okay. So I'll start off with Matt. Did you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think this is probably about how I would put it together, and I like the inclusion of Bilbo in the ring. He's always one of my favorite figures to kind of go running around, slip on the ring, run between people's legs, and charge in right beside Aragorn to make sure he's going to win the fight.
Mick, any thoughts?
Not really. I would also try to get Aragorn and Halbrand. Halbrand is really good with his banner, and really this is probably the only list you'll ever be taking Halbrand with. So you might as well go for it.
That is true. Other than a pure Rangers list, yeah, this is it.
Yeah, except you're almost never going to be taking a pure Rangers list. So.
Yeah, exactly. And just so you guys remember about Mick's comment about Halbrand, Halbrand's a fantastic model. However, the new FAQ restricts him where you have to bring Aragorn as well in order to ally him in. So that's one of the big reasons to never see him.
Okay. Finally, Rainier, any thoughts on the list?
Yeah, like all your lists, Devin, it's total trash.
All right.
Just joking.
Yeah, I'm just
it's really good. I wouldn't know how I'd change it, to be honest. Like, as everyone knows, you're the Hobbit dude of America and most of the world, so you know what works, and I feel like that's gonna work. I was kind of surprised you didn't bring Gandalf, just because he can complement the army so well with his magic tricks and his blinding light. But no, I love it. You've got the double hitters, especially Aragorn. I love how you added a bow to him. That's like a huge thing, is when heroes have might and a bow, they can do so much with taking out mounts. So yeah, I don't know how I could critique it at all. I think the shooting is a little good. If you go up against, say, Tim's Harad shooting or a Corsair shooting army or other heavy shooting armies, I think the hobbits won't do much. Even against elves with strength 3, I think they'll get they can lose quite a lot. But no, I like it. I especially like the inclusion of Bilbo if you added him. So I'd probably give it a good 4. A good 4. Though if you come up against a top tiered player on, say, round 5 or 6 who knows what they're doing, they could exploit that Aragorn's basically the only heavy hitter in the army. But yeah, I'd give it a solid 4. I like it a lot.
Well, just to comment on Rainier's point about Gandalf. So I brought Double Wizard with a Hobbit Horde. And essentially, the reason that I did not like it, like, it did very well. I think I got like second or something. But the reason I didn't like it was because I played Heirlooms of Ages Past, and I was on one corner of the board, and it literally took me an hour and a half to cross the damn board. It took forever. And so I think Gandalf is extremely necessary. And back in the day, I used to always play a wizard with them. But when you don't get all the hobbits, remember, when you bring Gandalf, you can't bring Merry or Pippin, which is 4 of your 6 available might in the list. So if you're restricted to a historical alliance, then I would not bring Gandalf. However, if I'm not restricted to a historical alliance, then I would bring Gandalf, as long as I had something else, maybe some other character with a plethora of might that can bring me, maybe gambling even. I've even flirted with that idea, just, having gambling with a contingent of Rohan Cav. But yeah, in a historical only, I don't think I would bring Gandalf just because he takes 4 of my might points away for Heroic March. So that's the reason. So.
All right.
There was an alternative Hobbit list I built a while ago, but I never actually used it. I wonder what you might think about this, Devin. A Yellow Alliance. There's Gwaihir, 2 Great Eagles, Gandalf, 3 Dunedain, and about 200 points of Hobbits.
I'm sorry. Hey, I apologize, Mick. This person's calling me, and unfortunately, Do Not Disturb is not stopping him from calling me. Go ahead. Sorry. Say the list one more time.
Gwaihir, 2 Great Eagles, Gandalf, 3 Dunedain, and about 200 points of Hobbits.
Yeah, so actually, I saw there is a player in the Pennsylvania community who actually plays a list similar to Gwaihir, an Eagle. You said 2 Eagles, right?
Yeah.
2 Eagles, and then you have Gandalf. So he doesn't have Gandalf in this 3rd Eagle. But 200 points of Hobbits will get you about maybe 3 warbands, depending on what you pick. So it's tempting to say that you don't have enough Hobbits in the sense that they get killed alarmingly fast, like insanely fast. But I think I personally would drop one of the Eagles. Just one. But because I do think that 2 Eagles, gosh, I'm having all kinds of technical issues here today. But I think I like it otherwise. I think that abusing the Eagles, I mean, I can see the temptation to have 3 Eagles, because effectively what you have is almost an Eagles list with bolstered numbers is really what it is. But I do like the idea behind it. I mean, I can't critique it without seeing the actual numbers and what Hobbit heroes you pick.
Sure.
But the idea is behind the list. You know, that's obviously, even once again, I think that kind of list, if you can abuse the Eagles and such, would be stronger than my pure version of the Shire. But like I said, under the restrictions of just pure, this is what I picked. That's the best way I think a pure Hobbits list work. And
I'd agree with Mick on the Eagle take. Like you've seen it, Devin. Like it's bizarre. It's like, oh shoot, there's like 60 Hobbits and like 2 Eagles flying amok.
Yeah.
But we call it, because he's from my group, Tim, we call it the Philly Special. Yeah. And it's just like, there's Gwaihir and like the Eagle Boys and a whole bunch of little Hobbits. Like, let's do it.
I fought that
and
list with a dual door list. It was actually pretty scary the way it operates. It actually works pretty well. So.
Yeah. Isn't there an American football team called Philadelphia Eagles as well?
Yeah, so they had a special Super Bowl play where they beat the Patriots, where they called it the Philly Special, and they won.
And then here's one more Philly Special. I hope I'm not giving away our tech, but bring Gwaihir and Galadriel, Lady of Light, and then Gwaihir's the running back. You take the mirror of Galadriel, hand it off to Gwaihir, and he just bulldozes and just has regenerating fate across the whole field.
That's right, folks. If you learn about football and Middle-earth SBG, you know where to come.
Yeah.
We talk about both at once. So we'll talk about next season as well, and then we'll move on to the all right, so next I'm going to move on to Mick. Mick, what did you decide to take?
So I picked Numenor for this week. Well, to outline Numenor in general, so over as long as I can remember playing, so like for the last 15 years, I've never really seen Numenor do well in any tournament or anything. There's multiple reasons for that. First of all, obviously Elendil is a powerhouse. He's probably one of the strongest heroes in the game. So he's really amazing with his fight 7, strength 5, free heroic combats, almost immunity to magic. So he's really good, and I wish there was a way to really put him into more battles, into more games. The problem is with Numenor in general is that everything else kind of sucks. So we've got Isildur, for example, who is basically probably Middle-earth's biggest loser. I mean, by keeping the ring for himself, he effectively sentenced millions of people to death. And within the game as well, if we're taking Elendil, who we pretty much always take, Isildur without the ring becomes just sort of slightly overpriced, overrated, just 3 attack, fight 6 hero. Then we have essentially only access to captains who are really good with fight 5, but ultimately, if you're going for a pure Numenor army, then you kind of have to end up going with something like Elendil, a couple of captains, and 40-something warriors, which really isn't very exciting. So I think allies are the only way forward. The problem is that the only green allies Numenor has is Rivendell. And that's a sort of ally where if you go into ally into Rivendell, you might as well take Rivendell as a pure army, or just play elves in general. There was a cool combination of having strength 4 warriors of Numenor backing or being backed by high elves, by Rivendell elves for this 5/5 strength 4 combination. So that's actually quite interesting. But the models cost so many points. You actually end up with quite little numbers in whatever situation you're in. So I've got two. I've got one main list, which is a pure list, and then one sort of fun / more creative list, which I would prefer playing normally. So I'll start with the more creative one. There's effectively only 6 models in it at 800 points, and that's Elendil, Isildur, Gil-galad, Glorfindel, Captain of Numenor, and a Rivendell Knight with a banner, all mounted with as much kit as they can take. So that seems to be sort of my only really competitive take on Numenor, in that Elendil is amazing, and if you can use him somewhere, then great. But I think ultimately allying with some big heroes is quite a good idea. The problem with Isildur again is that even in an all-hero army, he's actually quite weak compared to other heroes which you could ally. But that might require something like a yellow alliance with a Thranduil, so I'm not going to go into that. And then in terms of a pure sort of standard army of Numenor, I've come up with a list which is Elendil mounted with a shield, then 18 Numenorian warriors, 12 of which have shield and spears, and 6 of which have bow and spear, and then 2 warbands of a Numenor captain on horse with lance, shield, and heavy armor, leading 16 Numenorians with shields and spears and 8 Numenorians with bow and spear. And then we added banner on top of that. Obviously, at the moment, there are probably too many spears in the whole thing, so we should be able to potentially make some little adjustments, like maybe drop some spears, maybe add another banner. But ultimately, we're looking here at 795 points with 45 models. Now, in terms of the scale we're using, on might, that's effectively only 7 might points. However, Elendil gets 3 might, 3 heroic combats with Narsil. So I would probably give it a 3 out of 5. On heavy hitters, Elendil is great, obviously. But the Numenor captains are actually one of these things which often get overlooked, because they are 5/5, so fighting against anything except elves, when you charge, you're much more likely to win combats because of higher fight volume. And being on horses with lances, they're actually quite powerful. They can tear down through things like Moran orcs and stuff. So this list actually feels surprisingly strong against like a standard Mordor list filled with Moran orcs, for example, because of fight 4 across the board and strength 4. There's no tricks. In terms of grindability, again, sort of strength 4, fight 4 across the board with a banner, with some heroes, I'd probably give it something like a 3. It's only out shooting lists which which don't have more don't have more bows or don't have blinding lights. So at 800 points, it's not outshooting that many people, but ultimately you kind of want to have some bows in an army anyway. So this is looking at, let's say, 14 bows. Then in terms of numbers, at 800 points, 45 is actually quite good. So I'd give it a 4. And then mobility, sadly, Numenor lacks any sort of cavalry unless we ally. Now again, the problem is if we only go for green alliances, then we can only really ally in Rivendell Knights, led by something like Glorfindel or something like that, or Elrond. But all these models just cost such an atrocious high amount of points that they will really, really be cutting down into your numbers. So it's sort of like do I take Glorfindel and 5 knights, or do I have probably 15 more models? So on mobility, pure Numenor sadly suffers and ends up on something like 2-ish, 3-ish maybe. So that's all I've got on Numenor today.
So I actually like to chime in real quick because after I speak, I'm gonna have to go off for just a second, just a little bit. I'm gonna freeze my screen. So number one, and I should definitely bring this up. So a player in our community, and he's come over to England once, Jacob Hall. He actually plays a Last Alliance list, and he swears by it. And he has Elendil and Gil-galad leading some odd, I don't know, it's like 26 warriors, but then he has Círdan, which he says is 100% necessary. So I don't know, it definitely is an 800-point list, but he's got Círdan, Gil-galad, and Elendil. And this guy's good at the game. Like, he's not like anyone I would doubt as far as his list building abilities. I mean, I don't know if you might want to look again at that, but he says that list is an absolute powerhouse and it's something he'd easily go to Articon with if his Goblin Town list wasn't just tearing through everyone. So basically, just something to note. That's something I have to disagree with you on. Just from seeing him and his experience with it, and seeing him go to multiple tournaments with this Last Alliance list, he loves it, and he will decide whether he's putting Numenoreans or elves in the front or the back, depending on what he's fighting. But obviously, Círdan really helps make the list with Blinding Light and all the little shenanigans he adds in. So just something to note for our viewers out there on my opinion of that. Now, list as is, I'm going to go with, you kind of wrote 2 different lists here in a sense. So you wrote this all-hero version that is classic Mick. And what is it? Elendil, Gil-galad, Glorfindel, Isildur, and who?
Let me just double check again. Well, so if you go in purely in green, although there really isn't a reason to go green if you go in all heroes. So I would say actually you might as well go yellow with something like Elendil, Gil-galad, Glorfindel, Thranduil, and then the Rivendell Knight with a banner. But if you go in green, it's Elendil, Isildur, Gil-galad, Glorfindel, and a Captain of Numenor with a banner. With a Rivendell Knight with a banner.
Okay, so your regular list of Numenor has how many models?
45.
And how many bows?
14.
Okay, so I'd say that's a healthy amount of bows. I mean, 45 is pretty much what I would consider average in a Defense 5 army. I'd say, like, okay, you're doing pretty healthy there. We have 2 captains mounted, fully kitted out, plus Elendil and Isildur?
Yes. No, there's no Isildur.
Not Isildur. Okay, so I agree with not taking Isildur. I think him working, I mean, he really, I think, is a gimmick kind of character at this point, which is a shame to say considering he's fight 6, strength 5, like he looks like he should be an absolute powerhouse.
I'll defense in a minute.
Huh?
I'll rise to his defense in a minute.
Oh, perfect.
Well, the thing is, if you're not taking Elendil, then do take Isildur with a ring. But I would rather just take Elendil.
So I agree with taking Elendil over Isildur, but keep in mind, and one thing I would stress about this, and this is where I got to rise to his defense a little bit as well. Matt might say more on this, but Isildur is fight 6, strength 5, mounted, and I think I only had 110 points. Is that? I think it's like dirt cheap.
135 when mounted with
135. Okay, so
135 when you kid him out.
He's still extremely reasonable. I mean, if I just took the ring out of the picture and just said he doesn't even have it, which by the way he does, so that means it's an option in your toolkit. But even if he doesn't, I'm seeing him as a solid pick in most lists. Like if my Rohan army had access to a fight 6, strength 5 mounted guy.
Yeah, no, he's not only is he strength 5, but he's resistant to magic.
Yeah.
With the Numenor rule, and he gives resistance to magic to every Numenor guy within 6 inches of him.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I actually got to disagree with you there too. I really think, one, a Last Alliance list I think is really good as mentioned, but two, I think you're not giving Isildur as much credit as I think he's just overshadowed by his bigger, his father, which makes sense because Elendil, yeah, I'm going to take him first. It makes sense. But I do think Isildur is actually good in this game. The fact that if he does get dismounted, he gains a new ability to turn invisible. Yeah, I mean that, and he doesn't have to use it now. So the only thing I would say is I would normally be like, all right, what about the threat of ring raise just tearing him apart? On maybe drain courages and stuff. But the fact that he's resistant to magic helps against that. So I actually wouldn't swear off Isildur. Now, whether I'd take him over 2 captains is debatable. I think that you either take Elendil and Isildur and leave it at that, or you take Elendil and 2 captains like you have done. The 2 captains, I think, add mobility in other places, plus add the crucial march. So I agree with your decision to take 2 captains if you've already taken Elendil. So I'm pretty agreeing from there. So as far as lists go, I'll wrap it up. I don't think it's as low as a 2. I do think you might do better work than you might think. Now, keep in mind, let's assume we're going to a tournament where you can only take pure lists, so a lot of other people might be handicapped as much. But I don't know. I'd say it's a 3. I mean, you have solid hitting power. Not a whole hell of a lot of might, but enough for the, I think it's a little bit under the average for 800 points. But I mean, I would at least give it a 3. I wouldn't be so hard on it. I mean, it's a well kitted out list with no tricks. I mean, once you kill Elendil, you're screwed. But I mean, other than that, but he's kind of a hard target to kill. So that's my thoughts on it, though. I think you're being a little harder on that list. I actually think, obviously I agree. If you went all hero, you'd go convenient allies more. But I think if I were to take one of those 2 lists that you have mentioned, I actually would be more tempted to take your Elendil and 2 captains list, despite the hitting power of your all hero list is insane. I just think that 45 troops, all strength 4, fight 4, and you have, bows and flexibility and all that. I actually think that I gotta say I like your normal list better. So that's just my thoughts on it. But Matt, go ahead, because I know you had some defense for Isildur.
So
now I'm going to freeze my screen, but like I said, I'm still here.
So I actually just built this army, just finished building this army. And this last weekend, I got a chance to play 3 games with it, 1 on the tabletop and then 2 virtually on Tabletop Simulator. And I played pure Numenor lists. And in the first game, Isildur and Elendil combined and killed Sauron. And in the second and third game, Isildur killed Boromir of the White Tower twice. Once in the second game, once in the third game. So, I mean, I actually think that these guys are great. And, they have a lot of power. They have a lot of, they can get a lot of really good, solid guys. I think if you're going pure list, I think you probably do want to take Isildur and Elendil both at the higher points level. And I think it really is because you get the 2 bubbles of resistant to magic. So they're both really powerful hitters, and they're both remarkably hard to stop with magic. Elendil gets the 2 free rolls, Isildur gets the 1 free roll, and they also give resistant magic to anybody around them, so it's hard for double spellcasters to compel somebody into a position where he can get sorceress blasted through them to dismount them. And at low points levels, I think you do take Isildur, and which means you get the ring in almost all cases unless Sauron's on the table, and you're probably not going to see Sauron at low points levels. And that gives him kind of the ultimate trick ability where he just sits back behind the lines on his horse, so people aren't thinking about the ring, some hero charges up somewhere near him into like two of the Numenor guys, thinking to take them down and maybe heroic combat. And then Isildur says, all right, fine, puts on the ring, or dismounts from the horse, puts on the ring, charges through the line, through the opponent's guy, and becomes the trap as the third guy behind him. Once Isildur has the ring on, no one can outfight him. He's always going to be higher than his opponent. And at that point, you've got a trapped hero who's outfought, probably with 3 dice from Isildur, 4 guys from a couple Numenorians and a couple spears and potentially a banner. Somewhere in there is going to be a 6, and that hero is almost always going to go down against a strength 5 trap. And that's a really powerful trap, really powerful trick that goes with this army. And I think combined with the fact that you can, the guys are really good. The ordinary guys are really good at strength 4, fight 4. Their only real downfall is their low defense, but they're not actually that expensive, so you can get a decent number of them. You're probably going to get, as you do in your list, you got 45 models with them, and that's a decent number of guys, and they grind pretty well at fight 4, strength 4. They will win a lot of combats because you get enough of them, you can double rank them, and when they win, they tend to kill. They can do a significant amount of damage, and they've got 2 heavy hitters that come with them that are hard to stop with magic. You really got to take them on. And Elendil's a fight 5 guy, or I'm sorry, a fight 7 guy that is unlikely to be transfixed, and you really have to devote an awful lot of resources to stop him. Anyway, I just started playing the list. I really like it. I think it's fun to play with these 2 guys, and I think you might want to actually try it out and see how it plays. I think you're going to find it's a lot more fun than you had first thought.
I was gonna answer at lower points. I would agree. I would rather have Isildur, because ultimately at something like 500 you can't really afford a 200-point character. But my problem with Isildur was mostly that at higher points, if you have Elendil, he loses the ring, and that's kind of a big deal, I think. It's almost like it's sort of like you're trying to weigh whether you should be taking Elendil or you should be taking Isildur with the ring. So yeah, I'm just not entirely sure about that.
Yeah.
But I do like
higher points. This kind of becomes an anti-spellcaster list, because with those 2 resistant to magic bubbles, pretty much your whole army is going to be resistant to magic, including your heroes. And it's one that's really kind of designed to go after, like ring wraith, orcs backed up by ring wraiths and things like that. The other side's not going to be getting a lot out of their spells at that point.
All right. So we're going to move on to Rainier. What list did you have?
I thought it fitting, since I'm living in Korea, that I go to the far east of Middle Earth. And
before you go into it, did you have any thoughts on mixed list? I know, did you chime in already on that?
Not yet. Just quick thoughts. I think you and Matt covered basically all the things. My one thing would be, I'm a huge fan of the Fight 5 captains thrown in there, especially fully kitted. So that's a big thing that I respect. Besides that, I'd be in Matt's camp, and I was going to say this before he even said it, that Isildur is just so powerful for what he does. I've played so many games where it's like, okay, there's Elendil, avoid him, try not to do damage, and oh shoot, Isildur's in the back of my line killing my ring wraith, or Isildur's in the back of my line trapping my mega hero, and now my mega hero's fight sucks, and then I can't strike up, and he just kills him outright. So for 135 points, I think he does huge for that army, especially if you combine it with a Last Alliance theme, and you have the Fight 5 elves. But yeah, that's all I'd have to say. Maybe throw in some elves for the Fight 5 and the Defense 6, because the Defense 5 is really a little low, but I like it a lot. I'd rate it at like a 3.5. If it was just a pure tournament where people brought pure list, I'd actually rate it at a 4, because it looks quite simple, but if you use the captains right and you use Elendil right, it can do quite a lot of damage. especially against the armies that you're going to come up against. But yeah, that said, my army is a Far East a Green Alliance. I'm bringing Khand and Easterlings. One reason I'm bringing Easterlings along with Khand is because it's the only thing that Khand can ally with. That keeps them green. So let's see what I got. I have my first warband is a king on chariot. He's leading 8 Khand horsemen and 2 Khandish warrior with axes. My second warband is a Khandish chieftain on chariot. He's leading 8 horse and 1 warrior. My third warband is a Khandish chieftain on chariot again, 3 times a charm. And he's leading 4 horse. And then my fourth warband is going to be the big boy Amdur. And he is accompanied by 2 cataphracts, 8 warriors with shields, and 5 warriors with pike and shield, 1 being upgraded to Black Dragon Guard. The total is 800 points exact, 42 models, 9 might, 23 bows, 3 chariots, and 22 horses, and the king being the leader. I think the strong points are I have 4 heroes that can do damage, 3 of them being on chariots. They're going to be hard to kill, and they can do heroic combats and wipe out low defense battle lines. Amber not being my leader is a big thing that I chose, because Amdur, I feel like when I make him my leader, I'm a little too cautious with him. When I don't have him being my leader, he can do quite a lot of damage. He has blood and glory. He regains might when he kills heroes or multi-wound models. He has Lord of Blades. So when someone strikes up against him, which he's fight 6, he strikes up also for free, being fight 6 with an Elven Blade. That's pretty good. I accompanied him with 2 cataphracts because he gets that Gleaming Horde ability. So when he is mounted next to those 2 cataphracts, he's defense 7. So it's going to be hard for people to pick him off. And his horse is defense 6 too. So yeah, I have a lot of horse archers, a few chariots. I only have heroes mounted on chariots because I don't want to get transfixed or fell lighted away and to mow down my own guys. I have a good amount of soldiers. I think I have 42, with four strong heroes and cav archer mobilities there and whatnot. The random sprinkle of warriors in my war bands looks kind of odd, but the reason for that is in deployment, you put a warrior in front of your chariot, so your chariot cannot be charged, and come your turn, you can just mow down your warrior and go into the opponent. So if you play Khand, I've played this, a semi-similar force to this at 800 and 700 points, 750 twice at a tournament, and I've used that, and it takes your opponent off guard. So now to rate it, it's not quite scary, I want to say. I have 9 might, which I want to say is a little below average. So I'd give myself a 2.5 or maybe a 3. My heavy hitters, I have Amdur, which is a beast, and I have a king with a 6-inch. Oh yeah, the banners too. The king has a 6-inch banner, and Amdur has a 3-inch banner that can go up to 6 inches.
But just to keep in mind, the banner only affects Easterlings.
Yes, exactly. It does not count as a banner towards victory points. Good one. So yeah, that's what I have. I'd say my might a 2.5 to 3 hitters. I have them equally distributed. I feel like the chieftains can hit the troops pretty well, and they can survive heroes because they have the bulwark defense. That with the king and Amdur, I'd probably give myself around a 4. Tricks, the chariots actually seem straightforward, but they offer quite a lot of tricks. I've used this against Matt and Devin as well in tournaments, where you can heroic march with a chariot, and it gives it the ability to go 15 inches, and you don't need line of sight for chariots, so you can literally twirl around buildings or anything like that to get people. So 15, that's a good trick. Amdur, with all of his ability and just the heavy hitting, I can also go up to strength 5 with my chieftains and king when I go into combat against heavy defense things. So this That's pretty good. My grindability, I'd give myself a 2 actually, which is really, really bad. That is because the majority of my army is defense 4. And it's going to look like a lot when you come up against, if you come up against an army like this, because the big bases are the horses, but they drop like flies if you don't position them correctly, and if you only engage and disengage, or engage only when you know you're going to win. So the grindability of 2. Out shooting, I have 23 bows, I want to say. I can even change it to where I give some Easterlings bows, but I want to stick at 23. 3 of them having 2 my each heroes with bows. So the shooting's pretty good. I give it a 4. I wouldn't give it anything over a 4 because I feel blinding light will outshoot me because my low defense and other heavy shooting armies. I have experience taking this at tournaments, and I've only actually shot with it in 1 game, and that was against dwarves. Every other army I've engaged really fast because it can crumble in shooting. The numbers, I'd give it a 4 because I have 42 models, which is pretty good, especially against like scenarios where you need to get places. And the mobility, I'd give it a 5. The majority of my models, I don't want to say the majority, I have 22 horses and 3 chariots. So 26 mounted models. So I think I can get places. And the Kondish horsemen with a bow and a horse are only 13 points. So I don't feel guilty about wasting 1 to go search for a relic, or wasting 2 to go search for an objective in case 1 gets shot out. So yeah, the blaring weaknesses are the defense 4. It's kind of a glass cannon because if I do engage, I can piercing strike with all of my horse to get them to fight 4 and use the banners to that effect, accompanied with the chariots. But if that doesn't work, it's going to go down. Another weakness would be magic. Magic can ruin this army. Something that causes fear, this army is going to crumble against that. And the only thing I can use is my chariots. But outside that, I don't know. I just like the army a lot. I've never seen Kondish forces played in America, and you rarely actually see Easterlings played because they're considered super uncompetitive. But like I've said, I've played this at a 3-game tournament, and I've gotten first place in the States. And I've played it at a 5-game tournament, and I've gotten second place. So I think it can do quite a lot because no one plays it. The chariots are going to freak people out. And the synergy of, or I don't want to say the synergy, the mobility of, okay, I can shoot in this battle against the dwarves. Next battle, I'm against something heavy hitting. I can go flip the switch and be really aggressive with it. This army looks like it plays 1 way, but it can play 5 ways depending on the scenario or the army you go against. So I like it. I'd still grade it probably a 3.5 just because it has like weaknesses and a really competitive player can exploit those. But yeah, I like it. It's become my go-to army in the States just because I love the aesthetic so much.
Just to ask a couple quick questions to make sure I fully understand. How many models do you have total?
42.
So you have 42 models, and you said 22 of them are cav?
22 are cav, yeah.
22 are cav, and you have 23 bows?
Yeah.
All right. And one last question is, you had 2 kings or 1 king?
Amder, 1 king, and 2 chieftains.
Okay, 2 chiefs. All right.
So
You do
4
realize,
warbands in total.
Rainier, these days the chieftains are 5, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah. All right. Well, then, anyone want to go first? I can chime in.
Yeah,
So
I'll start.
All right.
So I always wanted to use these, and I feel like I now have a reason to do it. I always wanted to paint them. I generally quite like it. It's sort of the same list as a thing that we were talking in one of the previous episodes where we were praising chariots. I really like chariots, so the fact that you have 3 5/5 heroes on chariots and then Andrew on top, it is possible that if you just get a lucky turn, you'll just chew through, like, let's say 10 or 15 models within a single movement phase. So that's actually a really, really cool thing. Especially, this list feels really good against things like Goblin Town, where normally Goblin Town takes over the board and demolishes a lot of other armies. This basically just runs over Goblin Town, and it just seems like I would hate to be playing against this if I had Goblin Town. Yes, I really like it. I would say I would probably give it like a 3.4, even a 4. Under is very good. You have quite a sizable, sort of semi-sizable pike block, 13 models. All the cavalry is going to be really useful in a lot of scenarios. And again, as you say, the chariots, no one really knows how to play against them. So if you know how to play with them, then that's always a major advantage. That's all I have to say. Really, I'm gonna stop playing this soon.
All right. Well, I actually like the list a lot, to be honest. I actually think it's more competitive than you might think. It'll certainly clobber my Hobbit list. So basically, as far as the chariots, yeah, I mean, one thing I'm actually surprised about is that you didn't put a war drum in there to abuse the stacking of the war drum in Heroic March if wanted. Is there a reason for that, or just simply points?
Well, I think the war drum just affects Easterlings.
It does.
It only affects you. Okay, all right. They closed that loophole. So I guess you have to get a troll drummer if you wanted to do it the other way.
Yeah.
No, that even wouldn't work because the troll drummer only affects Mordor.
Really? Oh, I thought it was everything.
It's everything,
man.
but it's just Mordor.
All right, Jay Clare and his keywords. It's saving the day. So,
But the 3 chariots at least, they all have heroic march, so you can potentially get 15 inches on them.
yeah. All right. Well then. All right. So I think already you're doing. I think the inclusion of Amdur is why I like it so much. I think at first it was a cookie cutter list, and I'm like, okay, cool, you've allied with Easterlings, and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, Amdur in this list actually is very strong. The fact that you can send him in as a grenade is actually, I think, a smart option. Your king is no slouch. I like the fact that you use chieftains because they're a 40-point discount for a chariot, so plus the march. So, and of course I agree with not choosing normal chariots. I mean, I've often wondered if it's good to include just maybe one other chariot, maybe have it out in a flank somewhere, so if someone compels it, because chariots can only move in this sort of linear fashion, they can't just turn around and kill your army. I feel like the exposure to command and compel or spell light is a little bit mitigated, putting them in the right spot. But regardless, I have no play experience with that. But otherwise, yeah, I actually think it's pretty strong. While I don't think I'm on the fence on whether or not I would take that to a competitive event, I actually think that it might be worth taking. I think it does pretty well. Also, fantastic nod to your idea of putting one of your Khandish in front of the chariot during deployment and having those infantry. I actually love that strategy. That's something I've done, and I've seen it done, and it's fantastic. And a lot of newer players especially do not anticipate it. The fact that you can just, you don't even care if you go first or not. You'll be like, yeah, sure, go first and charge me. It doesn't matter. So, I actually like it. I hesitate to rate it a 4 since all these lists are supposed to be garbage since they're purely underused armies, but I actually would give it a pretty high rating. So like a 4. I like your numbers. I like everything about it. I think 42 models defense 4 does make me cringe, but I can understand why you have that. So that's just my thoughts on it. I actually like it quite a bit. So,
Matt, thoughts?
So I like it too. Just a couple thoughts of the ways you can synergize the Easterlings and the Khan together, and I actually have I have kind of the different version of this when we get to my allied list. But just a couple of thoughts of some things you can do. One is if you want to have that Easterling pike block that kind of fights in the dense 3-rank speed mass, is the chariots are great then to, like, as long as there isn't a spell cast around that's going to compel a chariot through the pike block. They kind of walk up behind the pike block, and then when the other guys go to kind of surround the pike block, as they tend to do, then the chariots come out from behind and they kind of run up the sides and kind of sweep the other guys' models away from the sides of the pike block as they charge in. Another another trick you could do if you went with the Easterlings, and just forgo black dragons, forgo guys with swords, just get a whole bunch of guys with pike and shield, ordinary guys with pike and shield, because the Condish warriors are fight 4, and they can go forward in the skirmish line in front, and even in a loose skirmish. And then the pike phalanx kind of advances behind, and then when the guy goes to engage your con in front, you take the pikemen and basically you arrange it so you stick 2 pikemen behind each con guy that's been engaged. So all of a sudden, 1 fight 4 guy becomes 3 fight 4 guys. And if Amdur is nearby, it's 3 fight 4 guys with a banner, because that's one way to make sure that the banner gets behind. If you wanted to throw in a drum, you could even do that, even have a longer skirmish zone, and then have the pike phalanx look behind. You can beat that drum. It's only going to affect the pikemen. So you can charge in with all your con guys to get the guys into contact. You get 9 inches of move to move those pikes up behind the guys that you're going to support. So you can actually use that drum to get the pikemen into contact with the guys who are free to charge up front. So that's a good way to kind of get the synergy there if you wanted to use the drum.
Yeah. To piggyback on that, I kind of have used that, and you can use the sprinkled in the 3 warriors to do that. And on top of that, they can piercing strike as well. So you have a phalanx block, and the front line is fight 4 and strength 4. But one reason why I'm not a fan of more than a few Condish warriors is because I think they're overpriced, to be honest. 8 points for a dude that's fight 4, that's nice, but he's defense 4 and courage 3, and he's just a base dude. Like, it's not that much. And even the phalanx, 11 points for a pike and shield, you can get similar points for an elf who has a shield and spear, and he's, instead of fight 3, he's fight 5. Instead of courage 3, he's courage 5.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, that might be true. But, I mean, it's something you can do also with your mounted guys, if your mounted guys get dismounted for whatever reason.
no, yeah, it's true. Good point. Yeah, so
And if you have to, you just throw the pike phalanx in on its own. It's just it's a way that you can kind of. I mean, usually the problem with the pike phalanx is it's very condensed and fights in one point. That's a way with the drum and a bunch of guys with pikes kind of behind the skirmish line of con, that you can actually use them to kind of spread out and cover a bunch of ground.
Matt, what would you give it out of 5?
I think I'd probably give it a 3.5. No, you know what? I'm going to give it a 4 because the chariots are scary.
Okay. Lastly, we have Matt with his list. Matt, what did you decide to take?
All right, so I took Easterlings, which is another army that I recently built, and I like the Easterlings first of all because the figures look great. They look great when you paint them up. You've got this, this massive wall of bronze armor that looks wonderful on the table, and they also tend to fight differently from other armies. That's another part of what I like about it. They tend to fight in what I think of a more historical, ancient army type faction. It's obvious that whoever built this army kind of looked at the Peter Jackson depictions and said, boy, these look like Seleucids, who were one of Alexander's successor kingdoms in the East, and kind of built an army that was designed to work like them. They didn't quite capture it, but clearly this is what whoever designed this army was thinking, and it's fun to kind of play them in a different way. And just to highlight them, they have as their main centerpieces, they have Kamul, who's very much a combat wraith. He has heroic strength. He has the ability to use his will to up his fight value and other stats. And he has the Essence Leech rule, which means he can go in, kill things, and regain his will. So he and the Witch King are probably the 2 best actual killers in the game when it comes to ring wraiths. And Kamul is somebody who can go in and just kind of continuously kill. Because as long as he kills 1 or 2 figures a turn, he can do it basically forever. Amder's another great hero killer. He's got no less than 6 special rules on him. And he can mimic heroic strikes. And he has the Blood and Glory special rule, so if he kills heroes, he can continue to regain his might. And then the two main troop types that come with him are the Pikemen that have the Phalanx special rule that allow them to fight in deep blocks. They can fight 3 deep without trapping themselves, which means that they actually look like a Pike Phalanx of this kind of dense block of troops that can go into the front of somebody. And they also have Cataphracts with the Gleaming Horde special rule. These guys are a bit underwhelming unless you take them as black dragons, in which case they become slightly less underwhelming. And the problem with them is they have swords and they have strength 3, so it's tough for them to wound. The ordinary Cataphracts are relatively cheap, but they're only fight 3, so they tend not to win a lot of combats. The Gleaming Horde special rule means that they get the equivalent of a shield wall special rule, which means that they get +1 defense when they're in contact with 2 other guys. So you tend to see these guys in like 3-figure groups wandering around the table that make them hard to shoot out. Once they get into combat and they start backing up, you tend to lose the benefit of this special rule. This is a bit disappointing. For all those history buffs out there, the way the Cataphracts actually work, they did kind of look like the figures. They were very heavily armored cavalry figures, or cavalry warriors, but they fought in very dense formations, and they typically fought in a wedge. They wouldn't charge at a gallop, they would charge at a trot because they were so heavy, and they would use just a mass of that dense cavalry formation, dense and deep cavalry formation, to force their way into an enemy infantry line. And I don't think the rule really captured the way they're supposed to operate on the battlefield. I wish they had a somewhat different special rule that allowed them maybe to attack. If you had somebody in another Cataphract in contact with a Cataphract, it could support like a spear. But anyway, they don't work like that. They work somewhat differently. The other advantage to the rule or to the army is the fact that they can put a 15-point drum on a Cataphract. And that's really what kind of makes, well, it's really, along with the Phalanx rule, what makes this army different is basically this entire army gets a bump up in mobility every turn that you want it to, with the cav going an extra 5 inches and the infantry going an extra 3 inches. And this gives you a mobility advantage over just about everybody in the game. And the downside of the army is the stuff is expensive. You're pretty much going to be outnumbered against whoever you're going to fight. So you need to use that mobility to get to the critical places on the battlefield before the other guy does, and with more stuff. This is definitely a get there the firstest with the mostest army, and chew up the opposing army before it can kind of bring everything to bear. So to the list, at 800 points, the Army General, I think, as it should be at this level of points, is Camul the Easterling on Fellbeast. And with him is he gets his Pike Phalanx that has three. Let's see. I guess to start it this way, it has 4 Easterling warriors with sword and shield, and they're at the front of the Phalanx. It has 3 Easterling warriors with pike and shield, and 1 Easterling warrior with pike, banner, and shield, and they're the second rank. And then 4 black dragons with pike and shield that sit at the give fight 4 to everybody up front. So you have a 4-figure wide phalanx with Camul up front. The second warband is Andrew Lord of Blades on the armored horse. And he also has a pike phalanx. He has 1 black dragon cataphract that's going to go with him, and that one has the drum. So this is going to be the mobile warband. Of course, the whole army can, once the whole army assembles, everybody can use it. And he's got supporting him 3 Eastern warriors with shield and spear, or shield and just shield. 3 with pike and shield, and 3 black dragons with pike and shield. So he's got his 9-figure phalanx that goes with him. Next is a Easterling Dragon Knight on armored horse, and with him are 2 black dragons on armored horse. So that's the little 3-figure wedge that can run around and be a little extra mobile hitting power. And there's 3 of them there, so until they get into combat at least, they're going to have +1 to their defense value. And then the last warband is an Easterling captain on foot. So he's got the hand-and-a-half axe and shield. And backing him up is another mini phalanx with 1 Easterling warrior with sword and shield, 4 with pike and shield, and 2 black dragons with pike and shield. So you end up with 3 small phalanxes that run around, and then you have 3 heavy hitters in the army that kind of go between the gaps in the phalanx to chew up the enemy. Who has terror, because terror can sometimes be a problem with this army. But the war priest is not a fighter. He's only 1 attack, fight 3. He only has 1 point of might. The Easterling captain at the head of one of these phalanxes gives you the 2nd point of might, and he's actually a decent hitter with 2 pikes behind him just to back him up, and a decent tank. So if you need to put him into another enemy leader to tie him up while Amdor, Kamul, and the Dragon Knight are chewing up the rest of the army, you can do that, because he can go into the fight and either have 2 pikes behind him or he can shield. And he's defense 7, so he can take a punch. So that is the list. It is 9 might, which is a decent amount of might for an Easterling list. A lot of times you'll see Easterling lists that have a small amount of might because they've got a bunch of, they've got Kamul and some Dragon Knights. But 9 might, I think, is a decent amount of might for this list. So probably like a 3.5. It's got a lot of hitters. It's got 3 heavy hitters here, one of which can be casting transfixes at you. So I think that's probably up around the 4.5 range. It's got a decent amount of tricks. It's got Kamul, who's got spells. It's got Amdor, who can copy heroic strikes, which allows him to take out some heroes. And it's got the drum that allows you to kind of put people where you need to be. So that's probably up around a 3.5 to 4. So grindability is an interesting dichotomy. If you can cover the flanks of this army, either with a terrain piece or with one of your heavy-hitting heroes, then this army does quite well in the grind, because it's going to get basically 3 dice with a banner all across the board, and it can fight on a narrow frontage. The problem comes in one of 2 circumstances. Either if you run up against somebody, basically if you run up against somebody who can outfight you with fight value, fight 5, and has a shield wall, you can take this army down, because it will die once you start getting into a lot of high number of dice combats where you've lost the fight value. You'll lose the fights, and your fighters will go down. I think the grindability here is probably a 3.5, but really it's the heroes that are going to be doing most of the killing here. Obviously, not a single bow in the army, so it's shooting going to be a 1 at best. Numbers, I think this clocks in at 35 models. This is probably a 2.5 number army, although the lowest fight value in this army is fight 6. Now, they're not hard to kill. So 2.5 to a 3. And
defense, right? Defense 6.
I'm sorry, defense. Yeah, defense 6. Yeah. And then mobility is actually high because of the drum. You can cover a lot of ground with this army, and because when you beat the drum, you don't need to stay within 4 inches of the drum. You can send your cavalry off to outflank people, go for it. So mobility is probably up around a 4.5 with this army.
All right, I'm going to ask Devin, do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you mentioned why you brought the captain, because at first my initial reaction was like, well, why not just bring the war priest, since, Fury, but I think your reasoning is actually solid. I think that you're just going to really hope you don't go against a terrifying army with Harbinger and such, but I think you have enough numbers to make it still work. Like, what is it, 45 models?
It's only 35 models, but
35.
The thing I found with this, because I tried it with the war priest in it, is whenever I try the war priest, I'm always missing that extra point of might, because it's important once the fell beast and Andra get into combat first.
Yeah.
And generally, I found that terror isn't that big a problem because of the way the pikes work. Because I could just go down the line and, somebody will pass and one guy will get in. You put 2 pikemen behind him. And as long as the other guys are kind of up within an inch of that guy to the point where somebody needs to charge the rest of the phalanx to get around him, you're okay. You've got enough guys and enough dense enough block that you can afford to let the enemy come to you and keep your individual guys from getting surrounded. And your heroes are probably going to get in even against her.
And actually, that's another great, fantastic point there. With your phalanx, you're actually putting yourself in an advantageous position where your opponent has to charge you and break their own lines to run in. So terror obviously only matters if you're moving and not the opponent, right? Like, so if they charge you, then great, just stack up behind your men and it makes it easy. So, okay, so I can see actually very logically the reason you took out the War Priest. Kamul and Felbeast, love him. Love the fact that you included a banner, even though you have Amder. At 35 points, Amder's going to cover your ranks. I mean, it's obvious. But you having a banner gives you an advantage in those 2 missions that require, or three missions that require them. So, I mean, as far as a Dragon Knight, he's always an iffy inclusion to me. And this will be the last point I make before I give it to Rainier. But the Dragon Knight... Yeah, like he's 95 points to be mounted, and he's got
actually only 80.
Oh, only 80. So 80. All right, 80 points for 6 defense, 2 wounds, and 0 fate. I just cringe including him. I think that Dragon Knights are way overpriced, and but I mean they're solid hitters, but definitely burn their might quickly because I just feel like they go down really fast, and of course Magic abuses them. So that's just my thoughts on it. But otherwise, I think the list is solid. I think all of your rankings are pretty accurate. I think, I think this list is slightly less scary than, like, let's say, Rainier's, just because trying to think about it. Like, I mean, you have a lot of hitting power. You definitely do. I'm not sure if I'm more afraid of Condi's Cav or an Easterling Pike block. But I'm more afraid of an Easterling Pike block, but at 35 models, I feel like it's just very few at 800 points. I feel like you will break nearly every game you fight a decent opponent. I think they will choose. I mean, I know they're defense 6, I do, but at 35 models, especially, I mean, usually at 800, you're talking about 40 plus, and most people calculate in, okay, they have a lot of heroes, they have a lot of troops that can deal a lot of damage. I do think you will be breaking often. That's personally my opinion on that. But otherwise, though, I think your mindset on everything was the right choice. What would I do different? I probably would take out the Dragon Knight and bolster those numbers. But I get it. You're losing a lot of hitting power and also 2 points of might. So that's a very difficult choice. So I'm not saying that's the best choice. I may have to rethink about it. Maybe taking out some of the specialty troops. Maybe taking out some of the cav. Like, how many cav did you have?
I only had the one guy with the drum and then the 2 guys that go with the Dragon Knight. So
okay, so you were conservative there. So
you would probably prefer my alternate allied list, which took out the Dragon Knight's warband, took out I think a couple of pikemen someplace to make up points, and added in a Conjur's King on a chariot.
I mean, just having I think a chariot is a better model, but then I think that lowers your numbers even more. Which
does lower the numbers. I think it brings me down to 32. So it doesn't usually take down the numbers, but
all right, I'd be hesitant to take down any numbers, but I think maybe a Mordor alliance is maybe what I would seek. But I mean, ultimately, and that's just thinking out of my head. But I mean, right now, that's my biggest problem with the list. I'll give it a 3, mostly because I feel like even at defense 6, at 800 points, where you're going to fight everything big, 35 models is kind of tiny. But that's my thoughts. Go ahead, Rainier.
Well, first of all, I liked it, Matt. We're going to have some critiques about it just because it's Easterlings and there's not much you can work around. But I think, let me see, I wrote a couple notes. I think the numbers is a little too low for my liking, especially with the majority of your army being strength 3 outside of the heroes. The problem with that is you're going to break really fast, but you're not going to be able to break your opponent. Unless the heroes pull their weight like way above what they're supposed to do. And I only say that because at 800 points, you're going to come across a Gil-galad and Elendil. You're going to come across like an Aragorn and Boromir, or maybe a Shirin tossed in there. So I think you might break fat a little too fast at 35. That being said, one thing we both forgot to mention was the Easterling army bonus. So
there's a reason I forgot to mention it. So the Easterling army bonus, just so folks know, is when you get to the point in the game when you're rolling for whether or not the game ends, like, you know, 1 or a 2 on when one side breaks, the Easterlings get to re-roll it. And
re-roll it only if the game ends and they didn't want it to. They can't do it the other way around.
Right, I think that's right. And I think I have never been in a situation with this particular army where that has come into play.
I think Rainier was talking about the second part of the bonus, not that.
Yeah, the second part is all your Easterling models get 1+ courage once you're broken. So that's a big deal. And the one thing about Easterlings is I feel like they don't kill much, they can't last long, and your only bet to play them is what Matt included was a drum. And that's to position the Easterlings in such a way that right when the game ends, you're there with all the objectives. Even the 35 models that you have, Matt, might be a bonus. Like maybe breaking fast will be smarter because you will be such on the backfield of your opponent because of the drum that you'll be in position for the scenario game. And then also the drum, I played against it once with my Corsair crossbow spam, and there's nothing scarier than, say, 10 to 15 Easterling horsemen at defense 7 that are in your face on round 2. Like, you can disrupt most shooting armies really well with that chariot. And I know with your skill too, Matt, like if I saw you with that army, I'd be pretty terrified because I know you're going to abuse that chariot with Kamal on the Fell Beast, also an Amber thrown in there. Also, I do want to agree with Devin though that the Black Dragon Knight, he's two might's good, 0 will's bad, and 0 fate's pretty bad too. That being said, most of your opponents will be focusing on Amder and Kamul so much that I think with your skill, and I like that, accompanying him with 2 cataphracts. Now he's defense 7 instead of defense 6. Doing that will let him survive a lot, and I think with your skill, you can get him in the back and kill a lot of things. So I don't know if I have any input besides that. The weakness would be low on numbers. The strengths, of course, would be the drum accompanied with the heroes. And I think even if you threw in 1 or 2 bows, it would make a huge difference. Because if you come across somebody with, say, 4 bows, 4 bows isn't much at all, but they're going to dictate the whole game. Have you come to them and stuff, and even 2 bows might change that. But yeah, I like it. I would add some chieftain chariots or a king chariot, like you said, just to add to the punch. Pike block in front, chariots on the edge, and the chariots can only go in one direction, and it's going to stop the opponent from coming and hitting and getting through you, so you can just mow them down like this. But yeah, I'd probably give it a 3. If you were playing it, I'd give it a 3.7 though. But I think overall, I'd give it a 3.
All right, Mick, any thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree with the Dragon Knight as well. It just seems to me like an overpriced captain, essentially. And the other thing is the strength 3 of the Easterlings. So I've played a lot of armies like Mordor with a Black Numenorian front line supported by orcs. And what I've always found is that if you're playing against anything with defense 6 or 7, then yeah, it's great. You have all these attacks. You may have high courage and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, you're just not killing enough. And so strength 3 just bounces off too many things. So having only 35 models, most of which are strength 3, is not really good enough for me. So I would say actually, I actually quite like the War Priest as well, because he's just one of those models where you can just randomly throw a strength 6 somewhere if you needed to. So I personally would swap out the Dragon Knight potentially for the War Priest and give the Easterling captain a horse, because ultimately the captain will then become almost as good as a Dragon Knight, whilst the War Priest will be able to still provide you with some additional higher strength hits here and there. Although ultimately I think the army just needs more numbers. I would ideally aim for like some like 40 or mid 40s, but I don't really think there is a way to fix that with pure Easterlings unless you go into alliances. Yeah, so I think we're all just running into the same conclusion of it's Easterlings. There isn't really that much that you can do to solve these issues.
And that's actually one reason I suggested Mordor as an alliance. I think they're historical as well, and Mordor will give you cheap fodder to bolster the numbers up. So
They
that's
are.
one reason I thought of it.
The problem is they slow down because they don't benefit from the drum.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
And so, I mean, one way to do this is to put Morannons in front, so you have the high defense in front and the strength 4 in front and the pikes behind, but then you're moving 6. And you have,
Yeah.
this is very much an army that plays to win, not by destroying the opponent's army, but by winning conditions. It uses mobility to do that. It just kind of get itself into the right positions at the right time to beat stuff. I mean, one thing I will say about it is that it breaks slower than you would really think. And it's not just because the army is defense 6 across the board. It's because of the way it fights in these 3 deep, very tight formations. Is it really limits the number of figures that you can gang up on an Easterling figure, so that when you lose, when you lose a fight, you tend to be losing at most. You're losing one guy, and there really isn't a lot of advantage to the other guy's heroes. Then so he calls a heroic combat, and there's really no place to go against an Easterling pikeman, because he'll kill one guy, and then at most he can join the adjacent fight that's already happening. So when the Easterlings die, they die slowly, and the equation here is to basically get your other heroes to be killing. Basically, Kamul kills a couple guys a turn, Amdur kills a couple guys a turn, and the Dragon Knight can also kill a couple guys a turn if nobody's trying to stop him, because he's still fight 5, he can still heroic strike, he's still mounted, and he's got 3 attacks. So if you can consistently kill 6 guys a turn with those 3 heroes, you can kind of win the grind with these guys.
I think I'll just add one more thing. Kamul and Felby sort of suffers from the same issue that Tim's army had earlier on, when I was suggesting Felbeast for that. In that, yes, you can stay back, but ultimately you sort of want to have Kamul fighting all the time, and 1 or 2 lost combats, and you might either just get stuck or just randomly die because it's only a ring break at the end of the day. So unlike something like a Betrayer or any other ring raid, which can stay back and actually support the army, Kamul kind of really needs to go into combat. Kamul seems to be the major downside of him.
And he's not a great caster either. He's really about going and killing stuff. I mean, and it's kind of a toss up here whether you make Amdur the army general or Kamul the army general, because Kamul's got defense 8 and 2 fate, and he's on a Felbeast, but Amdur has 3 wounds but only 1 fate. So it's kind of an interesting question which one you make the game.
I think ultimately, I agree that your point that the pike block prevents you from dying in extreme numbers, but at the same time, I wonder how condensed you'll be, because we hear the other armies that, if we just take the ones we heard today, all of them outnumber you and can sort of envelop, especially if you're forming pikes. So you already have less models, and now you're shrinking even more. So I wonder if your army can handle the envelopment when, let's say, the game starts ending, and then, now you need to move and scatter to different objectives, but you just can't. Now, I'm sure you would, as your skill, you would have mitigated this. I do not think you'd allow yourself to be a ball, but especially since you don't have fury, so you don't need to be. But just a minor thought on how your army might fight. But is Rainier gone?
Definitely an army that wants terrain to anchor its flanks, and so that it's harder to get around these guys on two sides.
All right. Well, then that seems to be about. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just add one final thought? You mentioned potentially allying Moran Orcs as your front line, but at that point, it sort of becomes a situation where you're adding an ally at the front, and then I started thinking, well, why not then change the army entirely and go with Mordor and Harad and just support with fight 4 Serpent Guards? At which point there isn't that much point to it.
The figures look so cool.
Remember, these are underused factions. They're all awesome.
To be honest with you, I've never really understood why. Like, I'll hear people say that they hate the look of the Easterlings, and I don't really understand that at all. I love the look of the Easterlings.
Alternatively, I could ditch Tamul and his warband and maybe Amdur and add in Azog and a signal.
I think that's a great idea.
That's the best option, I think. Yeah.
I don't think you can have too many signal towers and Azogs in a list.
In fact, why did you just ditch Easterlings at all, like completely, and just play a signal tower?
Every list from now on, Matt has to take Azog and signal tower. He has to fit it in somehow. All right, thank you for watching this week's episode. As always, leave comments in the comment section down below. If you have any thoughts for what you'd like to see in next episodes, please leave that as well. And we look forward to seeing you next week.